This brain starter is asking you what's the reference angle for an original angle of 120 degrees. Here's a diagram depicting what 120 degrees looks like. The reference angle is shown in red. Pause your video now so you can figure out what that reference angle is. Since the angle is in quadrant 2, and we're looking how far away it is from the x-axis, you can just think to yourself that if this is 180 and this is 120, well, just subtract 180 minus 120. That'll show you how far away it is. And the answer is 60 degrees. Now today we're going to be using these reference angles to find exact values of trigonometric ratios. Every trig ratio has special values at reference angles like 30, 45, and 60. And let's focus in on sine right now. The first one, for 30 degrees, sine of 30, is just 1 over 2. Sine of 45 is radical 2 over 2. And sine of 60 is radical 3 over 2. Now this seems complicated. How am I going to remember all of these things? Well, let me show you one thing. The denominator of all of these is 2. And look at the numerators. You have 1, 2, and 3. Man, wouldn't it be great if they were all under a radical symbol? Oh hey, what's the square root of 1? Why, it's 1, of course, which means that the square root of 1 over 2 is just regular 1 over 2. So if you just think of it as square root of 1, 2, 3 going across for 30, 45, and 60 degrees, and put everything over 2, you'll have a perfect situation. Now notice in cosine, it starts with radical 3, radical 2, and then radical 1, which is just 1. Now when looking at tangent, it helps to know that tangent is equal to sine over cosine. So let's look at 30 degrees. If tangent is sine over cosine, we have tan 30 equals sine of 30, which is 1/2, over cosine of 30, which is radical 3 over 2. So, with that, these 2's will cancel out because they're both in the denominator, leaving you with 1 over radical 3, which is true, but it's not what this says. The first thing you have to do, of course, is rationalize the denominator by multiplying by 1. 1, of course, being in the form of radical 3 over radical 3. So, you multiply tops together, you get radical 3, and then on the bottom, radical 3 times radical 3 is just 3. Exactly what we have here. And look at 45. Since they're both the same thing, when you divide it, you just end up with 1. And then, here at 60, you have 2's on the bottom, so you can cancel out the 2's, and then you're left with radical 3 over 1, which of course is just radical 3. Now, what will become very important is the quadrants, and what quadrant you're in determines whether or not your ratio is positive or negative. Now, a few days ago I taught you the phrase forecast, which means you start in quadrant 4 and you go around in the normal clockwise or counterclockwise direction. And the ones that are positive are, in this one, cosine, C. In this one, all of them, so there's an A. In this one, it's sine, there's the S. And in quadrant 3, it's tangent. So if you ever forget how to do these things, just remember forecast. Start in quadrant 4, go around counterclockwise the way normal angles are, and in quadrant 4 it's cosine, 1 is all of them, 2 is sine, and 3 is tangent. Okay, now let's put this into action. This first one says find the exact value of cosine of 120. The first thing you need to do is figure out what is the reference angle for 120. And we did it in the brain starter. The reference angle was 60 degrees because that's how far away it is from 180. So then we look at cosine of 60 degrees. Why, that's 1/2. But since we're in quadrant 2, we look here, and cosine is negative, which means cosine of 120 equals negative 1/2. To find the value of tangent of 7 pi over 6, first you need to find the reference angle of 7 pi over 6. Pause your video now so you can figure out the reference angle for 7 pi over 6. Since we're looking at how far away 7 pi over 6 is from 180, or in radians pi, what you would do is 7 pi over 6 minus pi. But let's rewrite that and make it easier on ourselves. Let's rewrite it as 6 pi over 6. That means the reference angle is just pi over 6. So, we're looking at pi over 6, and we're looking at tangent, which means that it's radical 3 over 3. And we're in quadrant 3, where tangent is positive. So, tangent of 7 pi over 6 is just positive radical 3 over 3.